Hello, friends. Good afternoon. My name is Miss Courtney. I am one of the branch librarians at Kent District Library. I work at our Gaines and Kentwood branches. Today I come to you live, as usual, from the historical room in the Gaines Township branch. Just a reminder that your libraries are open, so if you'd like to come and visit us, you can. We just ask that you wear a face mask covering your nose and mouth at all times while you're in the library. So please come in, check out some books, check out some movies, and we'd love to see your face from a safe distance. Just a reminder that KDL is streaming lots and lots of programs right here on Facebook, YouTube, or wherever you're watching currently. If you missed a program, you can always go back and rewatch it on either our Facebook page or a YouTube page. And yeah, one of our programs that we do weekly is our Teen Book Talk. So here's a short slide to tell you a little more about that. All right, so I hope you join us for those book talks if it sounds like something that you're interested in. But today I have another Ask the STEAM expert in our KDL Curiosity Lab online. So we have talked to Rhiannon from the zoo, Anthony from WMCAT. Last week we talked to Gretchen from Pine Rest. And this week we have Dr. Stephanie Algren. So she comes to us from the Grand Rapids Public Museum, which is one of my favorite places to go in Grand Rapids if I need something to do. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Stephanie. If you have any questions for Stephanie once we get going, please leave them in the comments. I can see the comments, so if you leave a question, I will be sure to ask Stephanie throughout this interview. So we're going to learn more about what she does at the museum, what she's done before the museum. So I'll take it away. So Stephanie attended Central Michigan University, where she received her Bachelor of Science in Biology and a Master of Science in Aquatic Sciences. She completed a PhD program at Michigan Tech University in Restoration Ecology. So she's got lots of science degrees. She worked as a senior aquatic biologist for a Native American tribe for 15 years, developing water quality programs and working with threatened species like the lake sturgeon. The ability to translate scientific information for the public has brought her back to the Grand Rapids Public Museum, where she assisted in developing an exhibit documenting the journey of the lake sturgeon throughout time. And she now develops programs, summer camps, and research projects for the museum. She assists with choosing exhibits and finding ways to work with schools and the public to learn more about history, science, and culture. She also still gets to jump in the water to gather aquatic bug and fish samples and looks for young lake sturgeon cruising the Grand River. So it is my pleasure to introduce us to our VP of Education at the Grand Rapids Public Museum. All right. Hello, Stephanie. How are you today?
Hi, I'm doing well. Thank you for that great, amazing introduction. I appreciate it.
No problem. All right. So we heard a little bit about your background. So why don't you tell us why you decided this route of science? What about biology and aquatic biology specifically was interesting to you? Like, when did you know? Did you come out, at 2 years old and you were like, I want to study fish? That was the first thing you said, or was it
Yeah, of
something?
course.
I thought so. Or was it something that you decided later in life? Tell us a little bit about your journey and all that stuff.
Sure. So I grew up in Grand Rapids. I'm from this area. And so coming back has been really cool. And growing up here, I didn't even really realize that we were right next to the Grand River. I went to zoo school in 6th grade. And so I always kind of liked outdoors and science. And I think I was that really annoying kid that always asked why all the time. And so I like science, and I thought that part of, school was fun to me, and I like doing experiments and stuff. And then I went to college. I knew I wanted to go to college, and I took lots of science classes in high school. But when I went to college, I got to take some aquatic classes at Central Michigan University, where I found out that you could get a job for going out on lakes and rivers. And I just thought that was the coolest thing. And so
Right.
really, I knew I wanted to do something with water, and I like being outside. But I work at a museum now, right? And so I did that. I worked outside for a really long time, and I did water quality sampling and a lot of work after college where I was a field biologist. So I would be on a crew that would go out with a bunch of other scientists and collect data and give presentations. And then a job opened up at the public museum, and I was super excited to move back to Grand Rapids. And I still get to do some of the outside work, but I also get to now translate a lot of that scientific data and share it with the public. And I think that's really important. And it's something that not all scientists are great at doing. When I was doing my research and work, I didn't ever want to have to sit down and put together a presentation and share it with the public. And so it's been really fun to kind of really explore that aspect of being a scientist.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds like a lot. Very interesting. So what were the types of things? I mean, you talked about water sampling. Was that what you mainly studied as an aquatic biologist, or were there lots of different fish species or different aquatic species that you studied?
Yeah, so because I went to school here in Michigan, I really studied freshwater systems. And so thinking about rivers and lakes and really how they interact with the landscape or,
Mhm.
the land around us was really important. And then how all of the different communities, be they fish communities or bug communities, algal communities, how all of those things work together within a water system. And how we can start to get an idea if we have clean water and what are indicators of safe and clean water. And so really, I looked a lot at how the organisms living in the water can tell us if that water is safe and clean and healthy.
Awesome. Are there any what was the grossest thing that you found while you were taking water samples?
Oh my gosh, that is such a good question. So there are these bugs. They're aquatic. They're called macroinvertebrates. Scientists make everything so much more difficult than it needs to be, right? So we call
Right.
bugs macroinvertebrates. So there's these aquatic bugs that are they're like gigantic worms, but they're really
Mm.
fat, and they're translucent, so you can kind of see through
Ooh,
them. So they're like 2 or 3 inches long, and they're called tapula. And they are really squirmy, and you can see their guts when they move around, and they live in leaf packs and streams, and they break down. They're really important. They break down organic matter
okay.
and
Well,
streams, but they're really,
I was like, even their name just
they
doesn't
can't bite you
sound
or anything. They're not dangerous,
oh
but
good.
they're pretty gross.
That's all I needed was like a translucent, flesh-eating water
No,
creature.
no,
I'm
no
glad
flesh
it doesn't do
eating.
that. Just leaves and other things that it needs to eat. That's good to know. But it also sounds interesting, but gross. I don't think I want to have one. Some of you watching may think, "Oh, that sounds like a great pet." Could they have that as a pet? Is there a way to buy? I'm just curious. I doubt there is, but
I don't think you could have it as a
ah,
pet.
sorry, kids.
I'm not sure they sell it at your local pet store.
Ah, darn. Sorry, kids. So you'll just have to go to the river or the lake and look for something that looks like it's moving on the water, but you're not sure it probably is moving on the water. Um, all right. So, what was a typical day like for you when you were an aquatic biologist, and what is a typical day for you like at the museum? And you can talk about before COVID because I'm sure your days look very different now.
Yes, 'cause I'm
Um,
here, not at the
Yes,
museum.
because you're clearly not, in the museum, in an office, but your internet is much better at home, it seems, so that's great for us. We can see you very clear, but, yeah, so what were your typical day or week, if, it varied from day to day, like as an aquatic biologist, and what's it like now working at the museum?
Sure. So, as a aquatic biologist, I was working for a Native American tribe in northern Michigan, and we were focusing a lot on looking for lake sturgeon and
Okay.
documenting lake sturgeon, which are really large fish
Mhm.
that can get up to 7 feet long. However, we were looking for the teeny tiny little babies that were about
Mhm.
an inch long. And to do that, you actually have to go out into the river at night. And so
Oh.
we were working in a large river system. We would get out to the river around 9 or 10 p.m. and stay out until 2 or 3 in the morning. And so my days were actually at night, and I would be sifting through lots and lots of samples that we would collect.
Mhm.
We'd wade out into the river over our waist, collect samples every hour, bring them back to the shore, and look for these little tiny fish. So
Yeah,
it was
definitely
really
different from the museum, unless it's night at the museum and you're there at night when all the exhibits come alive. Because that's true, right? They
fun.
all
It
they
is.
all
It's
come alive.
absolutely true, and that is a really cool time to be at the museum
I
also.
knew it. Ah, man. Alright. So
Yeah.
what is your day like at the museum now that you are on days instead of
Right.
evenings?
Yeah, well, I get to do a little bit of both. I still work with fish. We have 2 live lake sturgeon at the museum in our
Mm,
sturgeon Grand Fish, Grand River exhibit. I
mhm.
get to clean that fish tank and I make sure that, they get fed every day. So I do have that sort of aquatic interaction.
That has
But
to
I
be the
think
most
also
excited I've ever seen anyone to say that they get to clean the fish tank. I used to work at the Wyoming branch. They just got a new fish tank, but we had just a little fish tank, and yet no one wanted to clean that. So
well,
I'm
yeah,
glad
I'm
there's
not
someone
sure
that
it's my
enjoys it.
favorite thing, but it has to be done. And since they're an
Yes.
endangered species and we have special permits for them, I
Mhm.
treat them very carefully and want to make sure that we keep them nice and clean and healthy.
Very good.
So there is that piece, but I also, it varies day to day. Just like being a field biologist varied day to day, but sometimes I will go and work with a school group that might be on site. We'll do special tours, and I might do a special feeding of the lake sturgeon and talk to them about the Grand River and river restoration projects. Other times I'll be meeting with my coworkers and thinking about different exhibits that we may want to create in the future. We meet a lot with community groups where we get input on the types of content they'd like to see at the museum.
Mhm.
And then I also get to participate with our local universities and the John Ball Zoo on research projects. And so we're actually still doing research, and we do research on lake sturgeon right out in the Grand River, right in front of the museum.
Mhm.
And we are part of a large collaborative that looks at the different kinds of bugs that are in the river systems. And so I still get to do those aquatic parts of the field biology as well. So it's really a great mix of all those pieces of my past coming
Yeah.
together.
Just not at the middle of the night now.
It's not at the middle of the
Okay,
night. Well,
that's
every
good.
once in a while, but not regularly.
Not regularly at, 1 in the morning. Awesome. So is there anything about, either job, your previous or your current job, that you might think that people might have a misconception about? We talked with Gretchen, who's a nurse at Pine Rest, and we talked about how we normally view nurses as, those that are in the hospital and they have to deal with the blood and all the not so great parts about human life. But her job, she works at a mental health institute, so she works with other nurses. She doesn't have to do that kind of stuff. So there are other options. Is there anything like that in your job that some people may be like, oh, I don't know if I necessarily like that part of it, but I really like this part of biology? Um,
Sure. I think what's been really interesting is for both jobs, communicating with the public is so important. And it actually becomes a really big part of a field biologist job. If you run into someone out in the field, they're always going to ask you what you're up
right.
to or why you're doing something crazy with spotlights in the middle of the night. But you
Yeah.
have to be able to communicate that data with scientists and your peers and other people.
Hmm.
I was working for a Native American tribe, so making sure that we were communicating with their leadership and really sharing, what the data looked like and how that was going. And it's the same with my job at the museum today. It's how do we communicate with each other as staff people, but also how do we, communicate with the public through exhibits and programming, and now with COVID. So how do we do things like this, which is a great way to
Hmm.
communicate virtually, right? So it's all
Yeah.
about sharing what we do with other people.
Awesome. So speaking of COVID, how has your time or your job at the museum changed during this new time that we're currently in?
Yeah, so we're open to the public and we're at 25% capacity. And we're really excited to invite people to come to the museum, wearing a mask from their nose, to their chin at all times. And we also do a lot of virtual programming. So I was just sharing, we do some virtual stargazing programs. We have virtual education programs. So we have really small group drop-in education programs, but then we do virtual programs. So we as staff are encouraged to work from home whenever possible. So I really only go into the museum if I'm working directly with a program. Otherwise, I'm sitting here in my back office, working on developing new programs and working on presentations and
Mhm.
all of the sort of back of house stuff that we get to do.
Very nice, very nice. So you still go in to clean the fish tank, right?
Not as often as I did before. We have some amazing security staff who have to be there as essential employees every day.
Mhm.
So they now do the feeding,
Oh.
which has been great so that I don't have to go in. I've trained additional people to go in, but I do always check on the fish every time I go in because I get a little nervous. So
That's fair. That is fair. I didn't know that they were an endangered species, so I'm glad that I learned that today. Are there any other, speaking of endangered species, are there any other aquatic endangered species that are indigenous to the Great Lakes? And also, which Great Lake is your favorite? Because we all have a favorite. It's fine, they're all great, but everyone has a favorite lake for different reasons. Mine is Lake Michigan.
sure.
Lake Superior is a close second, but Lake Michigan is definitely my favorite. So, are there any other endangered Michigan aquatic species, and which is your favorite lake?
Sure. Well, I'll start with the latter. So, the favorite lake is really hard. I did spend quite a bit of time on Lake Superior because I went to Michigan Tech. And so
Mhm.
I love Lake Superior. I think it's beautiful. There's large, amazing rocky shorelines.
Yeah.
And it's deep and cold and it's stormy all the time, which I think is just a really cool thing. But I did grow up on Lake Michigan and I
Yeah.
love swimming in the lake. So to me, they're kind of a tie for different
Yeah.
reasons, but
Mhm.
I love them both. So I'm not sure I can pick. Um, for the endangered species, so sturgeon are actually a threatened species. I may have
Okay.
misspoke. They're a threatened species in Michigan. Um, but there are lots and lots of threatened and endangered aquatic species throughout the Great Lakes. One other really interesting one that I would mention is in the Grand River, and it's called the Snuffbox Mussel. And so it's a little mussel, a clam,
Mhm.
and it lives in the Grand River. And as they're thinking about doing restoration work in the Grand River, they've had to do a lot of research on this particular mussel because there's not very many left.
Mhm.
And one of the really cool things about this mussel is that the only way it can reproduce is if there's a very specific fish in its area. And so there's this fish called the log perch that the fish has to be by the mussel. The mussel's little babies actually go up and live in the fish's gills until they can drop out and live on their own. And it's only one host fish for this mussel. So it's this really neat symbiotic relationship that this mussel has, which is why it's an endangered species. And we are lucky enough to have them in the Grand River, which is pretty cool.
That is very interesting. I'm just like picturing the fish with, yeah, with like
There's all kinds of videos.
interesting.
The mussel actually traps the fish. It's really cool. You can Google it.
Ooh, I will have to because I'm very curious now
Yep,
how
Snuffbox
that
mussel. They're
works.
fun.
Perfect muscle. All right, I will not try and say that 5 times fast either. Um, okay, so we have 2 questions left, and then again, if you're watching and you have a question, please leave it as a comment, and I will ask Stephanie. So 2 questions. The first question, which I did tell you ahead of time, is what book character, if there is one, is there let me rephrase this. I just keep stumbling over my words today. What book character has a job that's most similar to either your current job or your previous job?
So this was really hard. That was a really, really hard question for
So I
me.
told you ahead of time, so I knew it would be hard.
Well, it's kind of interesting because there's not a lot of books
Mhm.
about scientists. I mean, there's lots of jobs or books. There's some creepy books about museum curators and things
Yep.
like that. But I'm not really a curator, right? I mean, I work in the education department. I do get to go through the archives and I talk to our curators all the time because they're always digging through cool old stuff. Um, but really, my job is more about like asking questions or like looking for answers. And so I think my job's more related to like someone that I would have read about when I was little, like Nancy Drew, right? Like
Mhm.
always trying to find the answer to a question, or like Alice in Wonderland, right? Being really curious. Those are sort of more what I would correlate my job to. So,
Interesting, interesting. When you were talking about going into the rivers and like taking the fish samples, I was like picturing you as like Professor Sprout in Harry Potter who teaches her biology. For some
yeah,
reason, I don't know why. I think it's like I was picturing gillyweed, and so I just went down the Harry Potter
it's a
rabbit hole.
spooky scientist,
Um,
right?
yeah, but it's like as close to science
Yeah.
as they get in the magical world. Okay, so the last question I have for you is what type of advice would you give some of our students that are watching if they're maybe seem interested in this based on what we've talked about? What are some steps that they can take, in middle school or high school to kind of figure out if biology is something that they want to pursue? Volunteer opportunities are probably what we would usually say, but in COVID, probably don't volunteer until it's safe to do so. But what are
Right.
some other things that they could do?
Yeah, I mean, I think yes, volunteer opportunities are a great way to see if you like something. It's actually one of the things that I did. I volunteered on a ship up in Traverse Bay, and
Mhm,
I taught science programs on that ship, and I loved it. And so that's really how I decided specifically where I wanted to go with the
mhm,
world, just not generally in science. So. I think a great thing for students to do, there's so many online resources right now. There's
mhm,
all sorts of digital opportunities like this, but also through the museum's website to just dig around and see what else is out there. I think you can ask your friends and family. I am continuously amazed about the variety of jobs that people have that I just
mhm,
had no idea about growing up, right?
mhm.
It's really doing the work, which I know no one wants to really do the work, but doing the work and digging around, right? And seeing what jobs are out there.
Mhm,
And if, one of your parents or guardians knows someone that has a job that sounds interesting, see if you could talk to them about it. Right. I think that is just one of the things I have now. I have quite a few, oddly enough, friends that are speech therapists. When I was
mm,
growing up, I didn't even know that was a job opportunity.
right.
Now it seems really cool. They have amazing jobs, right? So
Mhm,
I think just finding out what's out there is important. And for science, liking to ask questions and finding out answers and not giving up, being okay with being wrong, getting
mhm.
the wrong answer, absolutely has to be part of your personality as you move forward in that sort of career path.
Awesome. Thanks, Stephanie. So if I don't see any questions going once, going twice. I must have asked all the dying questions that they had
Wonderful.
for you. I try to put my, mind in theirs. So thank you, Stephanie, so much for joining us and sharing about your job experience and your passion for science. We can't wait until we can partner with the museum and do in-person programs when it is safe for everyone to do so. But until then, we will keep doing these digital programs. So yeah, so thank you everyone for joining, whether you're joining live or you're watching this after the fact. I have one more STEAM Ask the Expert, and our next one is going to be a ballet dancer. So get your thoughts moving about that. Until that, I will see you all next time. And let's see if I can find the goodbye one. All right, goodbye. Bye, Stephanie.
Thank you.